What would you do if the person you loved most turned out to be your worst enemy? Here's a sobering truth. Studies show that 1 in 3 elder abuse cases happen within wealthy families, hidden behind closed doors and designer curtains. The richer the family, the easier it is to silence the victims. This is the story of Julian Blackwood, a billionaire who had everything money could buy, except the one thing that mattered most, the truth about the woman he was about to marry. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all began. Picture this. A gleaming penthouse overlooking the city, champagne flowing like water, and Victoria Chin, stunning, sophisticated, seemingly perfect, standing beside Julian with a diamond the size of a small country on her finger. The press called them the golden couple. Forbes estimated their combined worth at over $8 billion. Their wedding was set to be the event of the decade. But here's what nobody saw. In the West Wing of the Blackwood estate, while Julian was closing billion-dollar deals across the globe, his mother Catherine sat alone in her wheelchair. And Victoria? She was showing her true face, the one she'd hidden so carefully from Julian, from the cameras, from everyone who mattered. "You're pathetic," Victoria hissed at the elderly woman one Tuesday afternoon. "A useless burden who should have been put away years ago." Catherine Blackwood, once a powerful executive herself, reduced to trembling silence by the woman her son called his future. Now, before we dive deeper into this 2-hour journey through deception, revenge, and ultimate justice, I want to be honest with you. This video took over 40 hours to research, 15 hours to write, and another 20 hours to produce. Every detail you're about to hear was carefully crafted to bring you the most compelling version of this story, the kind of story that reminds us why loyalty, family, and integrity matter more than all the money in the world. If you appreciate that level of dedication, and if you love stories about justice being served to those who deserve it, hit that subscribe button right now. It truly means the world and helps me continue creating these epic, in-depth stories for you. Now, here's my question for you. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted completely was living a double life? Drop your experience in the comments below. Your story might just be the next one we tell. Because that's exactly what happened to Julian. The day everything changed started like any other. Julian had just closed a merger worth $2.3 billion. He was on top of the world, flying home early to surprise Victoria, already imagining their future together. Growing old. Building a legacy. He walked through his front door with flowers in hand and his mother's favorite chocolates tucked under his arm. And then he heard it. Victoria's voice, dripping with venom, echoing from his mother's room. "You think Julian actually cares about you? You're just a responsibility. A chore. The moment we're married, I'm putting you somewhere you can't embarrass us anymore." Julian froze. His heart stopped. The woman he'd introduced to presidents and kings. The woman he'd given his grandmother's ring. The woman who smiled so sweetly in public was torturing his mother in private. But here's where most people would have confronted her immediately, right? Screamed. Broken off the engagement. Called security. Julian Blackwood wasn't most people. He'd built an empire by staying 3 steps ahead of everyone else. He knew that people reveal their true selves when they think they're safe, when they think they've won. So Julian made a decision that would change everything. He would give Victoria exactly what she wanted, or so she'd think. That night, in a darkened study, Julian sat across from Grace Morrison, the maid who'd served his family for 15 years. Grace had witnessed everything, months of psychological torture, degradation, and abuse. She'd kept silent because Catherine had begged her to, not wanting to burden her son. But now the truth was out. "Grace," Julian said quietly, his voice steady despite the rage burning inside him. "I need your help. We're going to take everything from her. But she won't see it coming until it's too late." What Victoria Chin didn't know was that she'd just declared war on the wrong family. And the billionaire she thought she'd manipulated? He was about to become her worst nightmare. This is the story of the perfect deception. Of masks falling. Of revenge served cold and calculated. Buckle up. The next 2 hours are going to be unforgettable. To understand how deep Victoria's betrayal cut, you need to understand who Julian Blackwood really was. Because this wasn't just another billionaire playboy story. This was about a man who'd been raised to believe that wealth came with responsibility, and who actually lived by that principle. Julian's father, Robert Blackwood, had died when Julian was only 16. Heart attack at his desk, closing a deal worth $40 million. The doctors said it was stress. Julian knew it was obsession. That night, sitting in the hospital waiting room, Julian made himself a promise. He would never become so consumed by money that he forgot what actually mattered. His mother Catherine had been his anchor through everything. She'd taken over Blackwood Industries temporarily, steering the company through the turbulent years until Julian graduated from Harvard Business School. She taught him how to read balance sheets and how to read people, skills that would serve him equally well. Money, Catherine told him on his 21st birthday, is a tool. The moment you worship it, it owns you. Julian never forgot that lesson. By 32, he'd quadrupled the family fortune. Blackwood Industries had expanded from real estate into tech, green energy, and pharmaceutical research. The business magazines called him a genius. The gossip columns called him the world's most eligible bachelor. But Julian's real pride wasn't the money. It was what he did with it. He'd personally funded 3 homeless shelters in the city. He'd established a scholarship program that sent 50 underprivileged kids to college every year. He visited his mother every Sunday for dinner, no matter how busy his schedule got. The penthouse apartment where he lived was worth $30 million, sure. But Julian still wore his father's old watch. Still drove himself to work most mornings. Still remembered the names of every person who worked in his building, from the CEO down to the night janitor. That's who Victoria saw at the charity gala 6 months before our story really begins. The Silvercrest Foundation's annual fundraiser. Black tie. $1,000 a plate. The city's elite gathered to feel good about themselves while writing tax-deductible checks. Julian was giving a speech about childhood literacy when he first noticed her. Victoria Chin stood near the back, wearing a midnight blue dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. But it wasn't the dress that caught his attention. It was the way she looked at him, like she was actually listening, not just waiting for her turn to network. After his speech, she approached him. Confident but not aggressive. Warm but not desperate. "Julian Blackwood," she said, extending her hand. "That was either the most genuine speech I've heard at one of these events, or you're a phenomenal actor. I'm hoping it's the former." He laughed. "Victoria Chin, I know who you are." And he did. Victoria had made a name for herself in philanthropic circles over the past 2 years. She'd organized fundraisers, volunteered at soup kitchens, appeared in all the right magazines saying all the right things about giving back. What Julian didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Victoria Chen's entire public persona was a calculated performance. Every charity appearance, every volunteered hour, every heartfelt speech was an investment in the image she was building. The image of a woman worthy of marrying into serious wealth. Their first date was at a small Italian restaurant in Brooklyn, far from the prying eyes of Manhattan's social scene. Julian appreciated that she suggested somewhere normal, somewhere they could actually talk. Victoria played her role flawlessly. She asked about his mother with what seemed like genuine interest. She talked about her own parents, immigrants who'd worked themselves to exhaustion giving her opportunities. She was funny. Self-deprecating. She didn't name-drop or try too hard. "I don't care about the money," she told him over tiramisu. "I've seen what it does to people. How it changes them. I just want to do something meaningful with my life." Julian believed her. Why wouldn't he? Everything he'd seen of Victoria Chin suggested she was exactly who she claimed to be. Their relationship moved fast. Within a month, they were inseparable. Within 3 months, Julian was introducing her to his inner circle. Within 4 months, she'd met Catherine. That first meeting should have been a warning sign. Catherine Blackwood had suffered a stroke 2 years earlier. It left her partially paralyzed on her left side, confined to a wheelchair, and needing daily assistance. But her mind was sharp as ever. She could read people the way Julian read financial reports. And when Victoria walked into Catherine's sunlit sitting room that first afternoon, something in the older woman's eyes flickered. Not warmth. Caution. "Mrs. Blackwood," Victoria said, kneeling beside the wheelchair with practiced grace. Julian has told me so much about you. It's an honor to finally meet you. Catherine studied her for a long moment. Too long. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, she spoke. My son seems quite taken with you, Miss Chin. I'm quite taken with him, Victoria replied smoothly. He's unlike anyone I've ever met. Yes, Catherine said softly. He is. Later that evening, after Victoria had left, Julian found his mother staring out the window at the garden. You don't like her, he said. It wasn't a question. Catherine turned her wheelchair to face him. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. I know you, Mom. Catherine sighed. Julian, you're my son. I want you to be happy. If Victoria makes you happy. But something feels performed. Rehearsed. She paused. Promise me you'll take your time. Really get to know her before you make any permanent decisions. Julian kissed his mother's forehead. I promise. It was a promise he would break 3 months later. The engagement happened on a yacht off the coast of Santorini. Julian had planned everything. The sunset, the champagne, the ring that had belonged to his grandmother. Victoria cried actual tears when he got down on one knee. Yes, she whispered. Yes, 1,000 times yes. The media went crazy. Billionaire bachelor off the market. The wedding of the century. Love and legacy, the Blackwoodshire union. Victoria's Instagram post of the ring got 2.3 million likes in 6 hours. But behind the filtered photos and champagne toasts, cracks were already forming. The first incident happened 3 weeks after the engagement. Julian had been called away on emergency business, a deal in Singapore that needed his personal attention. He'd be gone for 5 days. Take care of my mother, he said to Victoria before leaving. Grace will handle most of it, but Mom would love the company. She gets lonely. Of course, Victoria assured him. Don't worry about a thing. Julian landed in Singapore and immediately dove into negotiations. 14-hour days. His phone became an extension of his hand. But every evening he made time to call his mother. The first 3 nights, Catherine sounded fine. Tired but fine. The 4th night, something was different. Mom? You okay? The pause. Too long. Yes, sweetheart. Just tired. Has Victoria been by to visit? Another pause. She's busy with wedding planning. I understand. Julian felt a flicker of irritation but pushed it aside. I'll be home tomorrow. I'll come straight to you. I love you, Julian. Love you too, Mom. What Julian didn't know, what Catherine would never tell him, was that Victoria had visited exactly once during those 5 days. And that single visit had been a nightmare. Victoria had breezed into Catherine's room with her phone in hand, barely looking up from her screen. Julian asked me to check on you, she said, her voice devoid of the warmth she usually performed. Are you good? Need anything? Catherine had stared at this woman who would soon become her daughter-in-law. Perhaps you could stay for tea? We could talk about the wedding plans. I'd love to help. That's sweet, but I have actual important things to handle. Victoria finally looked up, her smile sharp. No offense, but I don't need input from someone who can barely hold a teacup. Catherine flinched as if she'd been slapped. Victoria laughed. Oh, don't look so dramatic. I'm just being honest. You and I both know what this is. Julian loves you, so I'll play nice when he's around. But when it's just us... She leaned down, her voice dropping to a whisper. Don't get in my way. Then she left, leaving Catherine trembling in her wheelchair, wondering if she'd imagined the pure venom in those words. Grace Morrison found Catherine 20 minutes later, tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Blackwood. Grace rushed over, kneeling beside the wheelchair. What happened? Are you in pain? Grace. Catherine's voice broke. Grace, I don't know what to do. And then, slowly, Catherine told her everything. The cruel words. The dismissive tone. The threat hidden beneath the polished smile. Grace felt rage burn through her chest. She'd worked for the Blackwoods for 15 years. Catherine had been kind to her when Grace was going through her divorce, had helped her daughter get into a good school, had treated her like family. We have to tell Mr. Julian, Grace said firmly. No. Catherine grabbed Grace's hand. Please. He's so happy. He's finally found someone. I won't ruin that because of one bad moment. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe she was just having a bad day. Mrs. Blackwood. Promise me, Grace. Promise me you won't say anything to Julian. Grace wanted to argue. Every instinct told her to pick up the phone right then and call Julian in Singapore. But Catherine was looking at her with such desperate hope in her eyes. The hope that she was wrong. That Victoria wasn't actually the monster she'd glimpsed. I promise, Grace said reluctantly. But if this happens again... If it happens again, we'll tell him together. It happened again. And again. And again. Over the next 3 months, whenever Julian was away on business, which was often, Victoria would drop her mask completely around Catherine. The verbal abuse started subtly. Backhanded compliments. Dismissive comments about Catherine's limitations. Suggestions that she was a burden on Julian. Must be hard, Victoria said one afternoon, knowing your son has to take care of you like you're a child. So much potential, wasted on wheelchair ramps and medical appointments. Catherine tried to defend herself. Julian doesn't see me as a burden. Doesn't he? Victoria's smile was poisonous. Or is he just too polite to say it? You're holding him back. Everyone knows it. The emotional abuse escalated. Victoria would accidentally leave Catherine's medication just out of reach. She'd dismiss the physical therapist Grace had scheduled without telling anyone. She'd move Catherine's wheelchair to inconvenient positions and then act confused when questioned. Oh, did I leave you facing the wall? Sorry, I forgot you can't turn yourself around. Grace witnessed most of it. Every cruel word. Every deliberate humiliation. Every calculated cruelty disguised as accident. And every time, Catherine made her promise not to tell Julian. He's closing the biggest deal of his career, Catherine would say. Or, he's under so much stress. Or, the wedding is in 6 weeks, I won't ruin it. Grace's frustration grew with each passing day. She started documenting everything in a private journal, dates, times, exact words spoken. She wasn't sure why. Some instinct told her this information would matter eventually. But she kept her promise. She stayed silent. And Victoria? Victoria grew bolder. She realized that Catherine would never tell Julian. That the older woman loved her son too much to risk his happiness. It made Victoria feel powerful. Invincible. She started making her abuse more obvious, testing the boundaries of what she could get away with. One Thursday afternoon, when Grace had the day off, Victoria wheeled Catherine out to the garden and left her in the hot sun for 3 hours without water. When Julian came home and found his mother dehydrated and sunburned, Victoria had the perfect excuse. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I thought Grace was watching her. I got pulled into a call with the wedding planner and completely lost track of time. Julian, ever trusting, accepted the explanation. It's okay, he said, though his jaw was tight. Just, please be more careful. Mom's fragile. Of course, Victoria said, her eyes wet with fake tears. I feel terrible. I'll do better, I promise. Behind Julian's back, she caught Catherine's eye and smiled. That night, alone in her room, Catherine finally broke down completely. She couldn't tell Julian. The wedding was in 5 weeks. The invitations were sent. The deposits were paid. 300 guests. A venue that cost more than most people's houses. How could she destroy all of that based on private moments no one else had witnessed? What if Julian thought she was lying? What if he thought the stroke had affected her mind? What if he chose Victoria over her? That fear, that her son might not believe her, kept Catherine silent. It was the fear Victoria had counted on all along. Meanwhile, Julian remained blissfully unaware. He saw his beautiful fiancée treating his mother with apparent kindness whenever he was around. He saw Victoria volunteering at charity events, organizing fundraisers, playing the role of the perfect future Mrs. Blackwood. He planned their honeymoon, 2 weeks in the Maldives. He finalized the guest list. He wrote his vows on sleepless nights, pouring his heart onto paper about the woman he thought he knew. The wedding was scheduled for a Saturday in June. The venue was the Blackwood family estate, 20 acres of manicured gardens, a mansion that had belonged to Julian's great-grandfather, and a view of the ocean that took your breath away. Victoria had spared no expense. The dress alone cost $80,000. The flowers were being flown in from Ecuador. A celebrity chef was catering. A string quartet that had played for royalty was booked for the ceremony. It was going to be perfect. The event of the year. A fairy tale ending. Except fairy tales aren't real. And some princes don't recognize the villain until it's almost too late. The wake-up call came on a Tuesday, 3 weeks before the wedding. Julian had been in London for a conference. He'd closed a partnership worth $2.3 billion and was flying home 2 days early to surprise Victoria and celebrate. He walked through the front door of his estate at 4 p.m. with flowers in one hand and his mother's favorite Belgian chocolates in the other. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Julian set down his bags and walked toward his mother's wing. That's when he heard it. Victoria's voice. But not the soft, gentle voice she used around him. This voice was sharp. Cruel. Dripping with contempt. You think Julian actually cares about you? You're pathetic. You're just a responsibility he's stuck with. An obligation. The moment we're married, I'm putting you somewhere you can't embarrass us anymore. Julian froze in the hallway, his blood turning to ice. His mother's voice, weak and trembling. Please. Victoria, I've never done anything to hurt you. You exist. That's enough. Victoria laughed. A sound devoid of any humanity. Do you know how much easier Julian's life would be without you draining his time, his money, his energy? You're a burden. A useless old woman taking up space. Julian's vision blurred red. His hands clenched into fists. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to burst through that door and he forced himself to breathe. To think. This wasn't a moment for rage. This was a moment for strategy. Victoria had played him for 6 months. She'd fooled everyone. She'd abused his mother, the woman who meant more to him than any amount of money, and hidden it behind a smile and designer dresses. She'd made one critical mistake, though. She'd underestimated Julian Blackwood. He backed away from the door silently, walked to his study, sat in his father's old leather chair and stared at the ceiling for 10 minutes, his mind racing through options, scenarios, consequences. Then he picked up his phone and called Grace Morrison. Grace, it's Julian. I need you to come to my study. Right now. Don't tell anyone, especially not Victoria. 20 minutes later, Grace sat across from him, hands clasped in her lap, tears streaming down her face as she told him everything. 3 months of abuse. Dozens of incidents. Every cruel word, every calculated humiliation, every moment of torture his mother had endured while he was oblivious. Why didn't you tell me? Julian's voice cracked. Why didn't Mom tell me? She was afraid, Grace whispered. Afraid you wouldn't believe her. Afraid of ruining your happiness. She loves you so much, Mr. Julian. She would have endured anything rather than hurt you. Julian felt something break inside his chest. His mother had suffered in silence to protect him, while he was falling in love with a monster. I have a journal, Grace added quietly. I documented everything. Dates, times, what she said. I thought maybe someday it would matter. It matters, Julian said. It matters more than you know. He stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the grounds where his wedding was supposed to take place in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. 300 guests. Millions of dollars in deposits and arrangements. And a woman who thought she'd won. Julian turned back to Grace, and the maid saw something in his eyes that made her shiver. Not anger. Something colder. More calculated. Grace, I need your help with something. Something that's going to seem strange, possibly even crazy. But I need you to trust me. Anything, Grace said immediately. We're not canceling the wedding, Julian said slowly. We're going to let Victoria think she's gotten away with everything. And then, when she feels safest, when she thinks she's untouchable. He paused, his jaw tight. We're going to take everything from her. Piece by piece. Until she has nothing left but the truth she tried to hide. Grace stared at him. What are you planning? Julian smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. I'm planning to give Victoria Chin exactly what she deserves. But first, I need to show her who I really am. And more importantly, his voice dropped to barely a whisper. I need to show her who she really is. If you were in Julian's position, if you discovered the person you loved was torturing your family behind your back, could you stay calm enough to plan revenge? Or would rage make you act immediately? Drop your honest answer below, because what Julian does next will test everything you think you know about justice and revenge. The game was about to begin. And Victoria Chin had no idea she was already losing. Revenge, it turns out, doesn't feel the way you think it will. Julian stood in his study the night after the wedding that wasn't, staring at his phone as it exploded with notifications. Texts, calls, emails. The video of Victoria's public humiliation had already been viewed 3 million times on social media. Billionaire exposes bride's abuse at altar, screamed the headlines. Justice or cruelty? Julian Blackwood's wedding day revenge sparks debate. He should have felt triumphant. Vindicated. He'd exposed a predator. Protected his mother. Prevented Victoria from hurting anyone else. Instead, he felt hollow. Grace knocked softly and entered with tea. The reporters are still camped outside the gate. Security says there are at least 40 of them now. Julian didn't look up from his phone. Let them wait. Mr. Julian. Grace hesitated. Are you okay? I did the right thing. He said it like he was trying to convince himself. I did the right thing. You did, Grace said firmly. That woman deserved to be exposed. Then why do I feel like I just nuked my own life? Because that's exactly what had happened. The next 72 hours were a media firestorm unlike anything Julian had ever experienced. His face was on every news channel, every gossip site, every social media platform. The public was divided. Half called him a hero. Finally, someone holding abusers accountable. This is what happens when you mess with the wrong family. Team Julian all the way. The other half called him cruel. He humiliated her in front of 300 people. That's psychotic. 2 wrongs don't make a right. He could have handled this privately. The think pieces came next. Dozens of articles analyzing every frame of that video, every decision Julian had made, every word he'd spoken. His inbox filled with messages from strangers. Some supportive. Some threatening. Some from women sharing their own stories of elder abuse, thanking him for bringing attention to a hidden epidemic. And some from people who knew Victoria, defending her. She made mistakes, but she didn't deserve public execution. Julian Blackwood is a vindictive billionaire who destroyed a woman's life for entertainment. Julian read them all. Every single one. He couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. Couldn't stop replaying that moment. Victoria's face when the video started playing. The sound of her heels on marble as she ran. Her mother's scream of horror. Maybe I went too far, he admitted to his mother 3 days later. They were in her sitting room. Catherine looked stronger than she had in months. The weight of Victoria's abuse was finally lifting, but her eyes were troubled as she looked at her son. Do you regret it? She asked. Julian thought about that. Really thought about it. No, he said finally. I regret that it was necessary. But I don't regret doing it. Then stop torturing yourself, Catherine said. Julian, that woman spent 3 months making my life hell. She was going to put me in a facility and isolate me from you. She was using you for your money and would have destroyed this family from the inside. Her voice was steady. You didn't just save me. You saved yourself. And probably her next victim. The internet doesn't see it that way. The internet, Catherine said dryly, has the attention span of a goldfish. Next week, they'll be outraged about something else. But the people who matter, the people who know you, they understand why you did what you did. Julian wanted to believe that. But the fallout kept coming. Victoria's family filed a lawsuit. Defamation. Emotional distress. Intentional infliction of emotional harm. They were asking for $50 million in damages. Julian's lawyers weren't worried. We have video evidence of everything. This case won't survive summary judgment. They're just trying to save face. But the lawsuit meant more media attention. More cameras. More reporters shouting questions every time Julian left his house. Mr. Blackwood, do you have any regrets? Julian, is it true you fabricated your financial troubles? Isn't that fraud? Have you spoken to Victoria since the wedding? Do you feel you owe her an apology? He stopped leaving the house. Meanwhile, Blackwood Industries started feeling the pressure. 3 board members called for emergency meetings, worried about the negative publicity affecting stock prices. Our shareholders are concerned, one told Julian on a conference call. The company's reputation is being dragged into your personal drama. The stock dropped 2%, Julian said. 2%. It'll recover. It's not just about the numbers. It's about perception. You're the face of this company, Julian. If you're seen as vindictive or unstable. I exposed an abuser, Julian cut him off. If that makes me unstable in your eyes, maybe you should reconsider your position on this board. Silence on the line. We're just advising caution, another board member said carefully. Perhaps a public statement. An apology for the manner of the revelation, if not the revelation itself. I'm not apologizing. Julian's voice was ice. Not now. Not ever. Victoria Chin abused my mother. That's not up for debate. The only question is whether this board stands with me or against me. More silence. Finally, we stand with you, Julian. Of course we do. But Julian could hear the doubt in their voices. The calculation. They were already running scenarios. What would happen if Julian was forced to step down? Who would take over? How would markets react? He was losing their confidence. And in the corporate world, that was almost as dangerous as losing money. Then came the interview. Victoria sat down with a major network 5 days after the wedding disaster. Full makeup. Perfect lighting. Tears on cue. I made mistakes, she said, her voice breaking. I said terrible things to Catherine, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. But I was stressed. Wedding planning, the pressure of marrying into such a prominent family, Julian's financial troubles, I snapped. I'm not proud of it. The interviewer nodded sympathetically. And Julian's response? Setting you up, humiliating you in front of hundreds of people? I understand he was hurt. I understand he wanted to protect his mother. But what he did? Victoria wiped away a tear. What he did was cruel. It was calculated. He didn't just break off the engagement. He destroyed my life. My reputation. My future. And he did it in the most public, painful way possible. Do you think you'll ever forgive him? Victoria looked straight at the camera. I don't know if I can. He made me a villain. But I'm a human being who made mistakes under stress. I didn't deserve to be publicly executed like this. The interview went viral. 10 million views in 24 hours. And just like that, the narrative shifted. Suddenly, Julian wasn't the hero exposing an abuser. He was the billionaire who'd weaponized his wealth and power to destroy a woman who'd made mistakes. He was the villain who'd taken justified anger and turned it into a public spectacle. The backlash was intense. Victoria's right, he went too far. Abuse isn't okay, but neither is revenge porn. Rich man uses his resources to humiliate and destroy a woman. Tale as old as time. Julian watched the interview alone in his study, his hands clenched so tight his knuckles went white. Grace found him there an hour later. Don't read the comments. It'll only make you feel worse. She's rewriting history, Julian said quietly. She's making herself the victim. Some people will believe her. Others won't. You can't control that. I thought exposing the truth would be enough. I thought once people saw what she really was. People see what they want to see, Grace said. And sometimes they want to see the powerful person as the villain, no matter what actually happened. Julian put his head in his hands. Did I make a mistake? No. Grace's voice was firm. You showed the world the truth. What they do with that truth is on them, not you. But knowing that didn't make it easier. The next 2 weeks were the darkest of Julian's life. He threw himself into work, trying to distract himself from the constant barrage of criticism. 16-hour days. Conference calls. Merger negotiations. Anything to keep his mind occupied. But even work became complicated. A major deal fell through, a partnership worth $1.2 billion, when the other company's CEO got cold feet. The board is concerned about the negative publicity, the CEO explained apologetically. They don't want to be associated with the controversy. Another client, a tech startup Julian had invested in, asked him to step back from his advisor role. It's nothing personal, but our investors are nervous. Your name is polarizing right now. Polarizing. That was the new word everyone used. Like he'd become radioactive. Julian started questioning everything. His judgment. His actions. The plan that had seemed so righteous in the moment but now felt like it might have cost him more than Victoria ever could have. He stopped sleeping. 3, maybe 4 hours a night. The rest of the time, he'd lie awake replaying it all. Wondering if there had been another way. A better way. You're destroying yourself, his friend David told him over drinks one evening. You need to let this go. How? Julian asked. How do I let it go when half the world thinks I'm a monster? By remembering why you did it. David leaned forward. Julian, I was there. I saw that video. What Victoria did to your mother was monstrous. You didn't invent that. You didn't exaggerate it. You showed people the truth. And destroyed her life in the process. She was destroying your mother's life. Where's the outrage about that? David shook his head. Look, maybe the execution was harsh. Maybe you could have handled it differently. But the core action, exposing an abuser, that was right. Don't let Twitter convince you otherwise. Julian wanted to believe him. But it was hard when every day brought new attacks, new articles, new ways people found to criticize his choices. The worst moment came 2 weeks after the wedding. Julian received a letter. Handwritten. No return address. I hope you're happy, it read. You took everything from me. My reputation, my future, my dignity. I made mistakes, but I didn't deserve this. You say you did this for justice, but really, you did it because your ego couldn't handle being fooled. You're not a hero, Julian. You're a cruel, vindictive man who used his power to destroy someone weaker. I hope someday you understand what you've done. I hope someday it haunts you the way you've haunted me. It was signed, Victoria. Julian read it 3 times. Then he burned it in his fireplace and watched the paper turn to ash. But the words stayed with him, burrowed into his brain, whispered to him in the quiet moments. You're not a hero. You're cruel. Vindictive. Was she right? He asked his mother that question one night. They were having dinner together, something Julian had insisted on doing every evening since the wedding disaster. He needed to see her, to remember why he'd done what he did. Mom, he said quietly, tell me honestly, did I go too far? Catherine set down her fork and looked at her son. Really looked at him. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes. The doubt that was eating him alive. Julian, she said slowly, do you know what Victoria said to me the day before the wedding? He shook his head. She came to my room. Alone. And she told me that after the honeymoon, she was going to convince you to put me in a memory care facility. Catherine's voice was steady. She said that I'd be diagnosed with dementia, she'd make sure of it, bribe doctors if she had to, and that I'd spend whatever years I have left in a place where I couldn't interfere with your marriage. Julian felt his blood run cold. She said that. Word for word. And you know what the worst part was? I believed her. I believed she could do it. That she'd manipulate you so thoroughly that you'd actually think it was the right choice. Catherine reached across the table and took Julian's hand. You didn't go too far, my darling. You stopped a predator. Yes, it was public. Yes, it was harsh. But it was also true. Every word. Every image. That was real. She squeezed his hand. Don't let her rewrite history. Don't let the internet make you doubt yourself. What you did took courage. And it may have saved my life. Julian felt something crack open in his chest. He hadn't cried since the wedding. Hadn't let himself. But now, sitting with his mother, the person he'd been trying to protect all along, tears finally came. I just wanted to make it right, he whispered. You did, Catherine said. You did, Julian. And I'm so proud of you. They sat together in silence, hands clasped, while Julian let himself feel everything he'd been holding back. The grief, the doubt, the exhaustion. And slowly, underneath all that, something else began to grow. Determination. The next morning, Julian woke up with clarity he hadn't felt in weeks. He'd been so focused on how the world perceived him that he'd lost sight of the actual mission. Not revenge, though that had been satisfying in the moment. Not public vindication, though he'd wanted that too. The mission was protecting vulnerable people from predators like Victoria. And that mission wasn't over. Julian called Marcus Chen, the private investigator. "I want you to find them," Julian said. "Victoria's other victims. The men she was engaged to before me. The ones who paid her off to go away. I want to know if there were others she hurt. Other family members she abused." "What are you planning?" Marcus asked. "I'm planning to make sure she can't do this to anyone else." Over the next week, Marcus compiled a devastating report. For previous engagements. Not 3, like they'd initially found. For each one had ended the same way, with the man suddenly willing to pay Victoria substantial amounts to leave quietly. And in 2 of those cases, Marcus discovered something Julian hadn't known. The men had elderly parents. Parents who had mysteriously recommended ending the engagement. Julian called one of them. William Fletcher, a real estate developer in Boston who'd been engaged to Victoria 3 years ago. "I don't want to talk about Victoria Chen," William said immediately when Julian identified himself. "I understand. But I need to know, did she hurt your family?" Silence on the line. Long enough that Julian thought William had hung up. Finally, "My father. He had Parkinson's. Victoria, she was cruel to him. Told him he was a burden. Told him he was ruining my life by existing." William's voice broke. "He tried to tell me, but I didn't believe him. I thought the disease was making him paranoid. It wasn't until after I paid Victoria off and she left that my father finally told me everything." "Why didn't you go to the police?" "And say what? She was verbally abusive? She didn't break any laws. She was just cruel. And my father was ashamed. He made me promise not to pursue it." A bitter laugh. "He died 6 months later. The stress probably contributed." Julian closed his eyes. "I'm sorry. I saw what you did. At your wedding." William paused. "Good for you. Someone needed to stop her." After that call, Julian made 2 more. Both told similar stories. Elder abuse, manipulation, cruelty hidden behind a beautiful smile. Victoria Chen wasn't just a gold digger. She was a serial abuser who'd spent years targeting wealthy men with vulnerable family members, confident that shame and social pressure would keep her victims silent. Until Julian. He compiled everything into a comprehensive dossier. Every victim's statement. Every piece of evidence. Every pattern of behavior. Then he sent it to the district attorney's office. "This probably won't result in criminal charges," his lawyer warned. "What she did was horrible, but most of it doesn't meet the legal definition of abuse." "I know," Julian said. "But I want it on record. I want there to be a paper trail so that when she tries this with her next victim, because she will try again, there's documented history." "You really think she'll try again?" "People like Victoria don't change," Julian said. "They just get better at hiding." Meanwhile, the media storm was finally beginning to die down. 6 weeks after the wedding, a major celebrity scandal broke and suddenly Julian's story was old news. The relief was immense. But the damage wasn't completely gone. Blackwood Industries' stock had recovered, but Julian's personal reputation was still polarized. Some saw him as a hero. Others as a villain. Most people had moved on entirely. Julian found he didn't care as much anymore. He'd stopped reading articles about himself. Stopped checking social media. Stopped trying to control a narrative that was ultimately out of his hands. Instead, he focused on what he could control. His relationship with his mother, his company, his own integrity. Catherine's health had improved dramatically. With Victoria gone and the stress lifted, Catherine was like a different person. Stronger, more vibrant, participating in physical therapy with renewed energy. "I think I might actually walk again," she told Julian one morning after a particularly good session. "You will," Julian said. "I have no doubt." Grace had become even more essential to the household. Julian promoted her to estate manager with a substantial raise and gave her complete authority over hiring and managing all household staff. "I don't know what to say," Grace said, tears in her eyes when Julian told her about the promotion. "Say you'll stay," Julian replied. "You were loyal when it mattered most. That's worth more than gold." Slowly, life began to return to something resembling normal. Julian started going back to the office regularly. Started taking meetings again. Started planning for Blackwood Industries' future without the constant distraction of media scrutiny. But he'd changed. The experience had altered something fundamental in him. He was more cautious now. More careful about who he let into his life. Trust, once broken so thoroughly, wasn't something he was willing to give easily anymore. He also found himself drawn to causes he'd never paid much attention to before. Elder abuse prevention. Support services for vulnerable adults. He established a foundation with a $10 million initial investment focused specifically on protecting seniors from exploitation. "You're turning your pain into purpose," David observed. "That's healthy." "I'm trying to make sure what happened to Mom doesn't happen to someone else," Julian corrected. "That's not about healing. It's about prevention." Can't it be both? Maybe it could. 3 months after the wedding, Julian received an unexpected call. It was William Fletcher, the ex-fiancé from Boston. "I wanted to thank you," William said. "After your story came out, I finally talked to my therapist about what Victoria did. About my father. About the guilt I carried. And I'm starting to, I don't know, process it, I guess." "I'm glad," Julian said sincerely. "There's something else. I'm working with a journalist on a piece about Victoria's pattern of abuse. Multiple victims coming forward. Would you be willing to contribute?" Julian thought about it. The media attention. The renewed scrutiny. The way it would drag everything back into the public eye. Then he thought about Catherine. About the months she'd suffered in silence. About the other families Victoria had hurt. "Yes," he said. "I'll contribute." The article ran 6 weeks later in a major investigative magazine. The serial abuser hiding in plain sight. Victoria Chen's history of elder abuse and manipulation. It was thorough, devastating, and undeniable. For victims told their stories. Documentation showed a clear pattern spanning 5 years. Mental health experts weighed in on the psychology of her behavior. And Julian's story, the wedding video, the public exposure, was contextualized as a desperate act by a son protecting his mother after all other options had failed. The public response was different this time. "Okay, I judged Julian Blackwood too harshly. This woman is a serial predator. This changes everything." He wasn't being vindictive, he was stopping a pattern of abuse. Why didn't any of these men go to the police? Oh right, because elder abuse is invisible and no one takes it seriously. Maybe Julian's public exposure was the only option. The narrative shifted again. Not completely, there were still people who thought Julian had been too harsh, but enough that he no longer felt like public enemy number one. More importantly, the article sparked a national conversation about elder abuse. Support hotlines reported increased call volume. Legislators in 3 states introduced bills to strengthen protections for vulnerable adults. The foundation Julian had established received donation inquiries from people wanting to help. Do you think Julian should have gone public with Victoria's full history from the beginning? Or was the gradual revelation through multiple victims more effective? Drop your thoughts below, because the approach matters just as much as the action itself. One evening, 4 months after everything had imploded, Julian sat with his mother watching the sunset from her favorite spot in the garden. "Do you regret any of it?" Catherine asked. "The public exposure. The media firestorm. Everything that came after?" Julian considered the question carefully. "I regret that it was necessary," he said finally. "I regret that we live in a world where elder abuse is so common and so ignored that my only option was to make a spectacle. I regret that you had to relive your trauma every time that video was shown on the news." He paused, watching the sun dip toward the horizon. "But do I regret stopping her? Do I regret making sure she couldn't hurt anyone else? Do I regret standing up for you when you couldn't stand up for yourself?" He looked at his mother. No. I don't regret that for a second. Catherine smiled. Good. Because I don't either. They sat in comfortable silence, both of them healing in their own way. Julian's phone buzzed. A text from David. Dinner tomorrow? There's someone I want you to meet. Julian almost declined automatically. He wasn't ready for dating. Wasn't ready to trust anyone new. Wasn't ready to open himself up to that kind of vulnerability again. But then he looked at his mother, strong and surviving despite everything. He thought about Grace, loyal even when it put her job at risk. About the victims who'd found the courage to come forward. About the good that had come from all this pain. Maybe, eventually, he could trust again. Maybe not tomorrow or next month or even next year. But eventually. He texted back, just dinner. Don't get any ideas. David responded with a laughing emoji, wouldn't dream of it. The sun set completely, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The garden lights flickered on automatically. Somewhere in the house, Grace was preparing dinner. Julian had survived the worst public humiliation of his life. His reputation was damaged but not destroyed. His company was stable. His mother was safe and healing. And he'd managed to spark a conversation that might actually help other families avoid the nightmare they'd lived through. It wasn't a perfect ending. It wasn't even close to a happy ending yet. But it was a beginning. And sometimes that's all you can ask for. We're at the midpoint of this incredible story. If you're still here, and I genuinely hope you are, thank you. Thank you for investing your time in this journey. What's kept you engaged so far? Is it Julian's determination? Catherine's strength? The moral complexity of revenge justice? Or something else entirely? Let me know in the comments. Your thoughts genuinely matter, and they help me understand what makes these stories resonate with you. The struggle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But Julian Blackwood had learned something crucial through all of this. Sometimes the hardest part of seeking justice isn't the act itself. It's living with the consequences. Accepting that you'll be misunderstood. That people will judge you without knowing the full story. That doing the right thing doesn't always feel good. But you do it anyway. Because some things, family, integrity, protecting the vulnerable, are worth fighting for even when the fight costs you everything. Julian stood up, offering his hand to help Catherine into her wheelchair. Ready for dinner, Mom? Ready, she said, taking his hand with a grip that was stronger than it had been in months. They went inside together. Survivor and protector. Mother and son. Scarred, but not broken. And somewhere out there, Victoria Chen was planning her next move. Because people like her always did. But that's a fight for another day. 6 months after the wedding that never was, Julian Blackwood stood in front of a crowded auditorium at a national conference on elder abuse prevention. 200 people filled the seats. Advocates. Social workers. Lawyers. Families who'd experienced what his mother had survived. My name is Julian Blackwood, he began, his voice steady. And 6 months ago, I made what many people called the worst decision of my life. I exposed my fiancé's abuse of my mother in front of 300 wedding guests. A murmur rippled through the audience. Some of you probably saw the video. Maybe you thought I was a hero. Maybe you thought I was cruel. Maybe you didn't know what to think. He paused. Honestly, there were days I didn't know what to think either. This was new for Julian. Not public speaking, he'd done that hundreds of times for business. But vulnerability? Admitting doubt? That was foreign territory. But here's what I learned through that experience. Elder abuse thrives in silence. It thrives in the assumption that family matters should stay private. It thrives when victims are too ashamed to speak up and bystanders are too uncomfortable to intervene. He clicked to the next slide. Statistics. Numbers that should have shocked people but didn't because elder abuse remained invisible to most of society. 1 in 10 seniors experience some form of abuse. But only 1 in 24 cases ever gets reported. That means for every person brave enough to come forward, 23 suffer in silence. Julian's voice hardened. That's not acceptable. That can never be acceptable. The audience was completely silent now. Listening. The foundation I established 6 months ago, the Blackwood Center for Elder Protection, has 3 goals. First, education. Teaching families to recognize the signs of abuse. Second, intervention. Providing resources and legal support for victims. Third, accountability. Making sure abusers face real consequences. He paused, making eye contact with people throughout the room. I'm not here to tell you I handled everything perfectly. I'm here to tell you that we need to stop treating elder abuse like a shameful secret and start treating it like the crime it is. The applause started slowly, then built. Within seconds, the entire auditorium was on its feet. Julian stood there, overwhelmed, as people who'd survived the same nightmare his mother had lived through showed their support. After the speech, a woman in her 60s approached him. Her eyes were wet with tears. "My daughter-in-law," she said quietly. "She treated me exactly like Victoria treated your mother. But I never told my son. I thought I was protecting him." She gripped Julian's hand. "Seeing what you did, it gave me courage. I finally told him last month. He believed me. She's out of our lives now." Julian felt something shift in his chest. I'm so glad you're safe now." "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for being loud when the rest of us couldn't be." That conversation stayed with Julian for days. Weeks. It became the fuel that powered everything that came next. Because the Blackwood Center wasn't just a charity project. It had become Julian's mission. He hired a staff of 12. Social workers. Legal advocates. A hotline manager. People who genuinely cared about protecting vulnerable adults and had the expertise to do it effectively. Within 3 months, the center had handled over 400 calls. Some were from concerned family members. Others from seniors themselves, finally finding the courage to report their abuse. The center provided free legal consultations. Connected families with protective services. Helped seniors escape dangerous situations. And yes, sometimes they helped families prosecute their abusers. Julian personally reviewed every case that involved potential criminal charges. He met with district attorneys. Pushed for elder abuse to be taken seriously by the legal system. Used his wealth and influence to make sure victims had access to the best representation. "You've become an activist," David observed one evening over drinks. "I never would have predicted that." "Neither would I," Julian admitted. "But once you see how broken the system is, how many people are suffering, you can't just ignore it." "Is this about your mom? Or about Victoria?" Julian considered that. "Both. Neither. It's about making sure what happened to us doesn't keep happening to others." The foundation wasn't his only transformation. Blackwood Industries had also evolved under Julian's renewed leadership. The company had always been successful, but now Julian ran it with a different philosophy. He implemented new policies. Family leave for employees caring for elderly parents. Mandatory training on recognizing elder abuse for all management. Partnerships with senior care facilities to ensure quality standards. "You're mixing business with personal crusades," one board member warned. "That's not always good practice." "Then fire me," Julian said simply. "Because I'm not backing down. This company can be profitable and ethical. If you can't see that, there's the door." No one walked out. And the policies stayed. The business press noticed. Julian Blackwood, from scandal to social impact, read one headline. "How one billionaire is changing corporate culture around elder care," read another. Julian didn't do it for the publicity. But he'd learned that publicity could be a tool. If companies saw that ethical behavior got positive press, maybe more would follow suit. The transformation wasn't just professional. It was personal. Julian started therapy. Real therapy, with a psychologist who specialized in trauma and trust issues. "I can't trust anyone anymore," Julian admitted in one of their early sessions. "Every time someone seems genuine, I wonder what they're hiding. What their angle is." "That's a normal response to betrayal," Dr. Sarah Chin told him. "But if you let it control you, Victoria wins. She doesn't just get to abuse your mother, she gets to poison every future relationship you might have." "So what do I do?" "You learn to trust selectively. Slowly. You look for consistency between words and actions over time. And you accept that trust is always a risk, but it's a risk worth taking with the right people. It was hard work. Painful work. But Julian committed to it the same way he committed to everything else. Completely. He started small. Letting Grace make decisions about the household without micromanaging. Delegating more at work. Accepting dinner invitations from friends without immediately questioning their motives. And slowly, so slowly, the paranoia began to ease. Catherine noticed the change. "You seem lighter," she told him during one of their nightly dinners. "Like a weight has lifted." "I'm working on it," Julian said. "The trust thing. The anger. All of it. I'm proud of you." Catherine reached across the table. "What Victoria did was terrible. But letting it define the rest of your life would be worse. You're not doing that. You're transforming it into something meaningful." Catherine herself was proof that healing was possible. 8 months after Victoria left, Catherine took her first steps without the wheelchair. It happened during a physical therapy session. Julian was there, watching as Catherine worked with her therapist on balance exercises. "I think I can do it," Catherine said suddenly. "I think I can walk. Mom, don't push. I can do it." And she did. 3 steps. Shaky but real. 3 steps that represented months of hard work and determination. Julian's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, don't you dare cry," Catherine said, but she was crying too. "We're Blackwoods. We don't cry." "We absolutely cry," Julian said, laughing through tears. "We cry when it matters." Catherine's progress accelerated after that. Within a month, she was walking with a cane. Within 2, she barely needed it. The doctors called it remarkable. Julian called it his mother being stubborn as hell. "I spent 3 months letting that woman make me feel weak," Catherine explained. "I'm not giving her one more day of my life. I'm taking it all back." And she did. Catherine became increasingly involved in the foundation, serving as the public face of elder abuse survival. She spoke at conferences, did interviews, shared her story with a grace and strength that inspired everyone who heard it. "Your mother is extraordinary," people told Julian constantly. "I know," he always replied. "I've always known." The mother-son relationship that Victoria had tried to destroy became stronger than ever. They were partners now, allies in a mission that mattered to them both. But transformation isn't linear. There were setbacks. 9 months after the wedding disaster, Julian ran into someone from Victoria's family. It was at a charity gala. Ironic, given everything. Julian was there representing the foundation. And across the room, he spotted Victoria's sister, Melissa. She saw him at the same moment. Her face hardened. Then, to Julian's surprise, she walked over. "Julian," she said coolly. "Melissa." He kept his voice neutral. "I suppose you're proud of yourself. You destroyed my sister's life." Julian felt the old anger rising. He took a breath. Let it settle. This was the test. Could he respond without becoming the villain she wanted him to be? "I exposed what your sister did to my mother," he said calmly. "I didn't invent those actions. I didn't force Victoria to abuse a vulnerable woman. I just showed people the truth." "The truth?" Melissa's laugh was bitter. "You humiliated her. Publicly. You used your money and power to crush someone weaker than you. Where was your concern when Victoria was abusing my mother? When she was planning to put her in a facility against her will?" Julian's voice remained steady. "Did you know about that? Did she tell you what she was doing?" Melissa's face flickered. Uncertainty. Guilt. "I didn't think so," Julian said. "Look, I'm not going to apologize for protecting my family. But I am sorry that you're caught in the middle of this. That wasn't my intention." "Victoria's in therapy now," Melissa said quietly. She's actually trying to understand why she did what she did. To figure out what's wrong with her." Julian felt a flicker of something. Not sympathy exactly, but maybe hope that Victoria's story didn't have to end with her being a monster. "That's good," he said. "Genuinely. I hope she gets the help she needs." "Do you really mean that?" "Yes." And surprisingly he did. "I didn't do what I did because I wanted Victoria to suffer forever. I did it to stop her from hurting anyone else. If therapy accomplishes that, then good. Melissa studied him for a long moment. You're different than I expected. So are you. They parted awkwardly, but without hostility. And Julian realized something important. He could acknowledge Victoria's humanity without excusing her actions. The two weren't mutually exclusive. That encounter led to another transformation, Julian's understanding of justice. He'd spent months convinced that justice meant consequences. Punishment. Making sure Victoria paid for what she'd done. But now he was starting to understand that real justice was more complex. It was about protection, prevention, and yes, sometimes rehabilitation. I don't forgive her, Julian told Dr. Chin in their next session. I'm not sure I ever will. But I don't need her to suffer forever either. I just need her to stop hurting people. That's growth, Dr. Chin said. Real, significant growth. Julian incorporated this understanding into the Foundation's work. Yes, they helped prosecute abusers when appropriate. But they also focused on intervention and prevention. Education programs. Support groups. Resources for people who recognize their own abusive patterns and wanted to change. You're creating a more nuanced approach to the problem, one of the Foundation's board members observed. It's not just about punishment, it's about breaking cycles. Exactly, Julian said. Because hurt people hurt people. If we can interrupt that cycle, we help everyone. The Foundation's success was starting to attract national attention. A year after its founding, the Blackwood Center had helped over 2,000 families. They'd successfully prosecuted 17 elder abuse cases. They'd trained 500 social workers in abuse recognition. They'd created educational materials that were being used in schools and senior centers across the country. Julian was invited to testify before Congress about elder abuse legislation. He spent 2 hours in front of a committee, sharing his mother's story, presenting data, arguing for stronger protections and better funding for intervention programs. Mr. Blackwood, one senator said, you've become quite the advocate for this cause. What drives you? Julian thought about the question. A year ago, he would have said anger, revenge, the need to make sure Victoria's actions had consequences. But I'm driven by the hundreds of people who've told me their stories, Julian said. The grandmother who was being financially exploited by her own grandson. The elderly man whose daughter-in-law refused to give him his medication on time. The woman who was locked in her room for 12 hours a day because she was too much trouble. He leaned forward. I'm driven by the fact that we live in a society that claims to value its elders but allows them to be abused at rates we would never tolerate for children. I'm driven by the knowledge that every case we help is a person reclaiming their dignity, their safety, their life. The testimony went viral. Clips of Julian's speech were shared millions of times. Billionaire who exposed abusive fiancée now fighting for all elder abuse victims. The narrative had completed its transformation. Julian wasn't the vindictive billionaire anymore. He was the advocate. The survivor's son who'd turned personal tragedy into public good. Blackwood Industries also hit new heights during this period. Turns out, running a company with actual ethics and values was good for business. Employee retention improved. Productivity increased. The company attracted top talent who wanted to work for an organization that stood for something beyond profit. Within a year of the wedding disaster, Blackwood Industries' stock had reached all-time highs. The company expanded into new markets, launched innovative products, acquired 3 smaller companies that aligned with their values. Julian's leadership style had evolved too. He was still demanding, still driven, but now he led with empathy. He understood that everyone on his team had lives outside work, families who needed them, struggles they were facing. You've become the boss people want to work for, his COO told him. Not just because you pay well, but because you actually care. I care because I've seen what happens when people feel powerless, Julian replied. When they think no one's listening or protecting them. I never want anyone at this company to feel that way. The personal transformation was perhaps the most surprising. Julian started dating again. Not seriously at first, just coffee dates, casual dinners, testing the waters of trust. He met Amanda at a foundation fundraiser. She was a trauma surgeon, brilliant and direct, with no interest in his money and no patience for bullshit. "I know who you are," she said on their first date. "I saw the wedding video. Want to talk about it?" "Not particularly. But I don't date people who are still obsessed with their exes, even if the obsession is revenge-flavored." She smiled. "But I do date people who turn their trauma into something meaningful. The foundation work is impressive." They took it slow. Very slow. Julian was upfront about his trust issues. Amanda was patient but firm about her boundaries. "I'm not going to tiptoe around your damage," she told him after their fifth date. "I'll be understanding, but I won't be your therapist or your rehabilitation project. You need to do that work yourself." "I am doing the work." "But keep doing it. And when you're ready for something real, let me know." It took 3 months before Julian was ready. 3 months of therapy, self-reflection, and slowly learning that not everyone who showed interest in him was secretly plotting something. "I'm ready," he told Amanda one evening, "for something real. If you still want that." "I do," she said. "But Julian, I need you to understand something. I'm not here to fix you or save you or prove that not all women are like Victoria. I'm here because I think you're interesting and damaged and trying really hard to be better. That's enough for me. Is it enough for you?" Julian thought about the man he'd been a year ago. Broken. Paranoid. Unable to trust. And then he thought about who he was now. Still scarred. Still cautious. But healing. Growing. Transforming. "It's enough," he said. They didn't rush into anything. No grand gestures. No expensive trips. Just honest conversation, consistent presence, and slowly building something real. Catherine approved immediately. "She doesn't take your shit," she observed. "I like her." "That seems to be her main selling point," Julian said dryly. "It is. You need someone who sees you, really sees you, and stays anyway. Not because of the money or in spite of the damage, but just stays." Amanda stayed. 15 months after the wedding that never was, Julian stood in the Foundation's new headquarters, a building they'd purchased and renovated specifically for their expanding operations. 50 employees now. A crisis hotline that received hundreds of calls per week. Legal services. Counseling. Educational programs. Partnerships with law enforcement agencies in 12 states. "You built something real," Grace said, standing beside him as they surveyed the bustling office. "We built something real," Julian corrected. "None of this happens without you speaking up. Without you documenting everything. Without you being brave when it mattered most." Grace smiled. "I suppose we make a good team." "The best." Julian's phone buzzed. A text from Amanda. "Surgery ran late. Still good for dinner?" He texted back, "Always. See you at 8. This was his life now. Foundation work. Business leadership. A relationship with someone who challenged him. Family dinners with his mother. Therapy sessions where he continued processing and healing. It wasn't perfect. He still had nightmares sometimes about the wedding. Still felt flashes of anger when he thought about what Victoria had done. Still struggled with trust in ways that probably wouldn't ever completely disappear. But he was better. Stronger. Transformed by the fire he'd walked through. "You know what's interesting?" Dr. Chen said in one of their recent sessions. "A year ago, you came in here talking about revenge and justice and making sure Victoria paid. Now you talk about prevention and healing and building systems that protect people. That's a fundamental shift in your worldview. Is that good or bad?" "Neither. It just is. But I'd argue it shows remarkable growth." She smiled. The Julian who exposed Victoria at that wedding was acting from pain and anger. The Julian sitting in front of me now is acting from purpose and wisdom. Both were necessary. But you couldn't stay in that first stage forever. Julian nodded slowly. "I don't think I could have gotten here without going through that fire first. Most people can't. Transformation requires destruction first. The old version has to burn away before the new version can emerge." At this point, Julian has transformed into someone completely different from the man who stood at that altar. He's gone from vindictive and broken to purposeful and healing. But here's my question for you. Do you think people can truly change at their core? Or do we just get better at managing our fundamental nature? This matters for what comes next, because Victoria is about to re-enter the story. And the question of whether people can change will be tested in ways none of us expect. Drop your thoughts below. That evening, Julian sat with his mother in the garden where they'd had so many conversations over the past year. "You're happy," Catherine observed. "Really happy. I can see it in your face." "I am," Julian admitted, which feels strange to say after everything that happened. Why strange? Because a year ago, I was standing at a wedding altar destroying someone's life. That should haunt me more than it does. Catherine was quiet for a moment. "Does it haunt you?" "Sometimes. But mostly." Julian searched for the right words. "Mostly I'm grateful. Grateful that we survived. Grateful that we turned it into something meaningful. Grateful that you're here and healthy and we get to have these conversations." "Then stop feeling guilty about being happy," Catherine said firmly. "Victoria made her choices. You made yours. You both have to live with the consequences. But you don't have to live in perpetual punishment because you took action to protect your family. When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just didn't listen." Catherine smiled. "Now tell me about Amanda. Are you in love with her?" Julian felt his face heat. "We haven't said that yet. That's not what I asked." He thought about Amanda. Her laugh. The way she called him out when he was being ridiculous. How she'd held him when he'd had a nightmare about Victoria. The quiet confidence she brought to everything she did. "Yeah," he said softly. "I think I am." "Good." Catherine squeezed his hand. "You deserve that. You deserve all of it. The happiness, the love, the peace. You've earned it." Julian looked at his mother, this woman who'd survived abuse and a stroke and months of uncertainty. Who'd found the strength to walk again. Who'd become a voice for thousands of other survivors. "We both did," he said. "We both earned it." They sat together in the fading light, two people who'd been broken and rebuilt themselves into something stronger. The transformation was complete. Not perfect but real. And somewhere out there, the world kept turning. New victims needed help. New battles needed fighting. New challenges would come. But Julian Blackwood was ready. Not as the man he'd been, but as the man he'd become. Transformed by fire. Tempered by pain. Stronger for the breaking. And that, ultimately, was the whole point. 18 months after the wedding that never was, Julian received an invitation he didn't expect. The National Philanthropic Leadership Awards. Black tie. 500 guests. And Julian Blackwood was being honored for his work with the Elder Abuse Prevention Foundation. "You should go," Amanda said when he showed her the invitation. "This is a big deal." "I know." Julian stared at the embossed card. "But these events, they're full of people from our social circle. People who were at the wedding. People who have opinions about what I did. People who've watched you spend the last 18 months building something meaningful," Amanda corrected. "Julian, you can't avoid high society forever. And honestly, you've earned this recognition." She was right. He knew she was right. But there was another reason he hesitated. An email he'd received 3 days earlier from the event coordinator. "We wanted to inform you that Victoria Chen will be in attendance as a guest of the Martinez family. We understand this may create an uncomfortable situation. If you prefer not to attend, we completely understand and will still honor you in absentia." Victoria would be there. 18 months. No contact. No communication except through lawyers handling the dismissed lawsuit. And now they'd be in the same room. Julian showed Amanda the email. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I want to not care," Julian said honestly. "I want to be so healed and moved on that seeing her means nothing. But I don't know if I'm there yet." Amanda took his hand. "Here's what I know about you, Julian Blackwood. You've spent 18 months transforming pain into purpose. You've helped thousands of families. You've repaired your relationship with your mother. You've built a company culture people respect. You've done the work, in therapy, in your life, in your heart." She squeezed his hand. Victoria Chin showing up to watch you receive an award for the foundation you built because of what she did? That's not a threat. That's poetic justice. So yes, you should go. You should walk in there with your head high, accept your award, and show everyone, including her, exactly who you've become. Julian looked at this woman who'd somehow seen through all his defenses and chosen to love him anyway. Will you come with me? Obviously, Amanda said. Someone needs to make sure you don't give a revenge speech that goes viral for the wrong reasons. He laughed despite himself. I wouldn't. You absolutely would. You're very dramatic when provoked. She kissed him. But that's why I'm coming. To keep you grounded. The night of the gala, Julian stood in front of his mirror adjusting his bow tie for the third time. Catherine appeared in his doorway, elegant in a deep blue dress, walking without even a cane now. You look nervous, she observed. I'm not nervous. He was absolutely nervous. Julian. Catherine walked over and fixed his tie with the efficiency of someone who'd been doing it for 32 years. She's just a person. A flawed, damaged person who hurt us. But she doesn't have power over you anymore unless you give it to her. What if seeing her brings it all back? The anger. The betrayal. Then you feel it and let it pass through you. You don't live in it. Catherine stepped back, examining her work. Perfect. Now listen to me. Tonight isn't about Victoria. It's about you and the incredible work you've done. She's just going to be in the audience watching you get recognition for turning her cruelty into something beautiful. Let her watch. Julian took a deep breath. When did you become the wise one in this relationship? I've always been the wise one. You just needed 18 months to catch up. They arrived at the Four Seasons ballroom at 7:30. Amanda looked stunning in a red dress that made Julian forget, momentarily, why he was nervous. Ready? She asked, taking his arm. Ready. The ballroom was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers. White tablecloths. Hundreds of people in formal wear networking, laughing, celebrating philanthropy. Julian felt eyes on him immediately. The whispers started. Not cruel, mostly curious. The man from the viral video. The billionaire who'd exposed his abusive fiancée at their wedding. 18 months later, he was still that story to many of these people. Grace had come too, as Julian's guest. I'm not missing this, she'd said when he invited her. Not after everything we went through together. They found their table. David was there with his wife. 2 board members from the foundation. The head of a major elder abuse advocacy group. And 3 tables away, Julian saw her. Victoria Chin. She looked different. Thinner. Her hair was shorter. She wore a simple black dress, nothing like the designer gowns she used to favor. She sat quietly at her table, not networking or laughing like most guests. Their eyes met across the room. Julian felt his heart rate spike. Felt the old anger trying to surface. Felt Amanda's hand find his under the table. Breathe, she whispered. Just breathe. He did. In through his nose. Out through his mouth. Just like Dr. Chin had taught him. Victoria looked away first. She looks small, Catherine observed quietly. Diminished. Mom. I'm not gloating. I'm just observing. Catherine sipped her champagne. The woman who tormented me was larger than life. Cruel and confident. That woman over there looks broken. Julian didn't respond. He didn't trust himself to. The program began. Speeches from various philanthropic leaders. Awards for different categories. Julian tried to focus on the presentations, but his awareness of Victoria's presence was like a constant hum in the background. Finally, the moment came. And now, the host announced, we come to our evening's highest honor. The Catalyst Award, given to an individual who has transformed personal tragedy into systematic change, helping countless others in the process. Julian's stomach clenched. This year's recipient started his foundation just 18 months ago after witnessing elder abuse firsthand. In that short time, the Blackwood Center for Elder Protection has helped over 3,000 families, trained 800 social workers, and successfully advocated for stronger elder abuse legislation in 6 states. The lights dimmed. A video began playing on the large screens. Testimonials from families the foundation had helped. Catherine speaking about her own experience. Clips of Julian testifying before Congress. Statistics showing the foundation's impact. Julian watched the screen, barely recognizing himself in these clips. The man in those videos was confident, purposeful, transformed. Ladies and gentlemen, the host continued as the video ended, please join me in honoring Julian Blackwood. The applause was thunderous. A standing ovation. 500 people on their feet. Julian stood, kissed Amanda, squeezed his mother's hand, and walked to the stage. He glanced at Victoria's table as he passed. She was standing, clapping, but her face was unreadable. On stage, the host handed him a crystal award. They shook hands. More applause. Then it was Julian's turn to speak. He looked out at the sea of faces. So many people he knew. Colleagues, friends, reporters. And somewhere in that crowd, the woman who'd started this entire journey by being cruel to someone vulnerable. Thank you, Julian began. This honor means more than you know. 18 months ago, I discovered that someone I loved and trusted was abusing my mother. And in that moment, I had to make a choice about how to respond. The room was completely silent now. I chose public exposure. I chose to show everyone exactly what had happened, in the most dramatic way possible. And that choice was complicated. It was messy. It was controversial. Some people called me a hero. Others called me cruel. Both were probably a little bit right. He paused, his eyes finding Amanda in the crowd. Then his mother. Then, inevitably, Victoria. But here's what I learned through that experience and everything that came after. Justice isn't just about consequences. It's about prevention. It's about building systems that protect the vulnerable instead of just punishing those who hurt them. Julian held up the award. This foundation exists because one woman chose to abuse someone powerless. But it thrives because thousands of people chose to do something about that problem. Social workers who dedicate their lives to protecting seniors. Lawyers who take cases pro bono. Families who find the courage to report abuse. Survivors who share their stories so others know they're not alone. He could see Victoria now, clearly. She was crying silently. The Blackwood Center isn't my achievement. It's ours. Every person who called our hotline. Every advocate who trained in abuse recognition. Every family member who chose to speak up instead of staying silent. You're all part of this. Julian's voice grew stronger. To anyone out there suffering abuse, whether you're elderly, disabled, or otherwise vulnerable, I want you to know something. Your voice matters. Your dignity matters. And there are people who will stand with you when you're ready to speak up. You are not alone. You are not a burden. You deserve safety and respect and love. More applause. But Julian wasn't done. And to the abusers who might be watching, we see you. We're building systems to catch you. We're training people to recognize your patterns. We're empowering your victims to report you. The shadows you hide in are getting smaller every day. He paused one final time. 18 months ago, I stood at a wedding altar and exposed one person's cruelty. Tonight, I'm standing here representing a movement to expose and prevent all such cruelty. That's the difference between revenge and justice. Revenge is personal and finite. Justice is systematic and infinite. I choose justice. The standing ovation this time was even louder. People weren't just clapping, they were cheering. Julian walked off the stage, his heart pounding, and returned to his table. That was perfect, Amanda whispered, kissing his cheek. You were perfect. Catherine gripped his hand. Your father would be so proud. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, photographs, and networking. Dozens of people approached Julian wanting to talk about the foundation, share their own stories, or offer support. And through it all, Julian was aware of Victoria. Still at her table. Still quiet. Still diminished. After dinner, as the evening wound down and people began to leave, Julian excused himself to get some air. He stepped onto the terrace overlooking the city lights, breathing in the cool night air. Julian turned. Victoria stood in the doorway, backlit by the ballroom lights. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She looked even smaller up close. The confidence that had once radiated from her was completely gone. She looked like someone who'd been hollowed out and was still figuring out how to be whole again. "Congratulations," Victoria said quietly. "The award. The foundation. All of it. You deserve it." Julian studied her, trying to reconcile this quiet, broken woman with the person who'd been so cruel to his mother. "Thank you. I've been in therapy," Victoria continued, words tumbling out like she'd been rehearsing this. "Real therapy. For 18 months. Trying to understand why I did what I did. Why I became that person. And?" Julian kept his voice neutral. "And it turns out I have a personality disorder. Narcissistic traits with sociopathic tendencies. That's not an excuse. My therapist is very clear that it's not an excuse. But it's an explanation." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I spent so long manipulating people, using them, that I forgot how to actually feel anything real. Including empathy." Julian didn't respond. He wasn't sure what to say. "I watched your speech tonight," Victoria said, "about justice versus revenge. And I realized something. You could have destroyed me completely. You had the resources, the motivation, the justification. But you didn't. You exposed what I did, and then you moved on to building something meaningful." She looked up at him, tears on her face. "That's more mercy than I deserved. More grace than I would have shown if our positions were reversed." "This isn't about mercy," Julian said quietly. "It's about refusing to let what you did define the rest of my life. I could have spent 18 months trying to ruin you. Instead, I spent it helping people. That choice wasn't for you. It was for me. I know." Victoria wiped her eyes. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that. I just wanted you to know that I see what you built. I see what I almost destroyed. And I'm genuinely glad you didn't let me." Julian looked at this woman who'd caused so much pain, who'd been exposed and humiliated and forced to confront the monster she'd become. And he felt nothing. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Not vindication. Just nothing. The poison was gone. The wound had healed. Victoria Chen was just a person now, a damaged person who'd hurt him, but who no longer had any power over his life. "I hope your therapy works," Julian said finally. "I hope you figure out how to be someone who doesn't hurt vulnerable people. Not for my sake, but for whoever you meet next." "I'm not dating," Victoria said quickly. "I'm not. I'm taking time. Years, probably. To actually work on myself instead of just performing recovery." "Good." Silence stretched between them. "Your mother," Victoria said hesitantly. "How is she?" "She's walking again. Thriving actually. She's one of the Foundation's primary advocates." "I'm glad." Victoria's voice broke. "I'm so glad she's okay. What I did to her, it's the thing I regret most. Not getting caught. Not the public humiliation. But actually hurting someone who'd never done anything to me." Julian nodded. "I'll tell her you said that. I won't speak for her about whether she forgives you. That's her choice to make, not mine." "Of course." Victoria turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, Julian, you were right to expose me. I was a monster. Someone needed to stop me before I hurt anyone else. I wish it hadn't been necessary, but it was." She walked back into the ballroom, leaving Julian alone on the terrace. Amanda appeared a minute later. "You okay?" "Yeah." Julian pulled her close. "Yeah, I really am." "Did you get closure?" Julian thought about that. About Victoria's apology, her acknowledgement, her visible brokenness. "I don't need closure from her," he realized. "I already had it. The moment I stopped thinking about revenge and started building something positive, that was my closure. Seeing her tonight just confirmed it." "Good." Amanda kissed him. "Because your mother is ready to leave, and she wants ice cream on the way home." Julian laughed. "Of course she does." They went back inside together. Julian collected his mother and Grace. Said goodbye to David and the other guests. As they left the ballroom, Julian took one last look back. Victoria was sitting alone at her table, staring at nothing. He felt a flicker of something. Not quite pity. Not quite sympathy. Just Recognition that they'd both been damaged by what happened, and they were both doing their best to heal. The difference was Julian had people. His mother, Amanda, friends who'd stood by him. A purpose that drove him forward. Victoria had therapy and regret and the long, hard work of becoming someone better. "You're thinking too hard," Catherine observed as they rode down in the elevator. "Just processing. Process faster. We have ice cream plans." In the car, Amanda asked the question Julian knew was coming. "Do you feel satisfied with how that went? The confrontation?" Julian considered it. "There wasn't really a confrontation," he said finally. "That's what surprised me. I thought seeing her would bring back all the anger, all the hurt. But it didn't. She apologized. I acknowledged it. We both moved on. That's not a confrontation, that's just two people who hurt each other, finding a way to coexist. Is that enough? It's more than enough." Julian took Amanda's hand. 18 months ago, I wanted her to suffer. I wanted revenge. Tonight, I just wanted her to leave me alone so I could enjoy my award with the people I love. That shift, that's how I know I've healed. Grace spoke up from the front seat. "Mr. Julian, if I may, what you said in your speech about justice versus revenge. That was the most important thing anyone said tonight." "You think so?" "I know so. Because revenge is about the past. Justice is about the future. You chose the future. Not just for yourself, but for everyone the foundation helps." Catherine smiled. "Grace is right. You've become the man your father hoped you'd be. The man I knew you could be." Julian felt something settle in his chest. Real, genuine peace. They stopped for ice cream at an all-night diner. Sat in a booth laughing about terrible wedding stories and foundation mishaps and everything except Victoria. The confrontation is over. Not with drama or revenge or vindication, but with quiet acknowledgement and mutual survival. Do you feel satisfied with how this played out? Would you have wanted Julian to do something different? Reject Victoria's apology, demand more accountability, or refuse to even speak to her? There's no wrong answer here. Different people need different kinds of closure. Drop your thoughts below, because how we find peace with our past says a lot about who we are. At midnight, Julian walked Amanda to her car. "Thank you," he said, "for being there tonight. For being here, period. Where else would I be?" She kissed him. "I love you, Julian Blackwood. The messy, damaged, trying really hard to be better version of you." It was the first time she'd said it. The first time he'd heard those words from anyone except his mother in over 2 years. "I love you too," he said. "And I'm not scared to say it. That's how I know I'm actually healing." Amanda smiled. "But, because I'm not going anywhere." She drove away, and Julian stood in the parking lot for a moment, looking up at the stars. 18 months ago, he'd been standing at an altar destroying someone's life. Tonight, he'd accepted an award for building thousands of lives up. The journey from one to the other had been brutal, but it had also been necessary. Julian Blackwood had been broken. And in being broken, he'd learned how to build something stronger than what existed before. That was the real transformation. Not revenge. Not even justice. Just choosing, every single day, to build instead of destroy. He got in his car and drove home, leaving the confrontation, and everything it represented, behind him. 6 months after the gala, Julian received a call from Marcus Chen, the private investigator. "I thought you'd want to know," Marcus said. "Victoria Chen filed for bankruptcy last week." Julian sat back in his office chair, processing that information. Bankruptcy? Complete financial collapse. Turns out the legal fees from the lawsuit she filed against you drained most of her savings. Then the investigative article about her history of abuse cost her the few remaining social connections she had. No one wants to associate with her anymore. Can't get invited to events. Can't network her way into wealthy circles. Marcus paused. She's working as a receptionist at a dental office in Queens. Making $35,000 a year. Living in a studio apartment. Her family's mostly cut her off, they're tired of the scandal. She's alone, broke, and from what my sources tell me, still in intensive therapy 3 times a week. Julian felt nothing. No satisfaction. No vindication. Just a distant sense of completion. Thanks for letting me know. You good? Marcus asked. Yeah, I'm good. Send me your final invoice. I think we're done here. After hanging up, Julian stared out his office window at the city below. Victoria Chen, the woman who'd almost destroyed his family, was now living the kind of life she'd spent years trying to escape through manipulation and abuse. He could have felt triumphant. Could have called his mother, shared the news, celebrated the cosmic justice of it all. Instead, he felt tired. Tired of thinking about Victoria. Tired of her story being intertwined with his. He called Amanda instead. Victoria's bankrupt, he told her. Living in Queens, working reception, completely cut off from her old life. How do you feel about that? Honestly? I just want to stop thinking about her. She's paid her consequences. The universe has balanced itself. I'm done. Good, Amanda said. Because I have much more interesting news. The hospital board approved my proposal. We're launching a new trauma unit specifically for elder abuse victims. Medical care combined with counseling and legal support. Julian smiled. That's incredible. It's inspired by your foundation's model. Which means it's inspired by what you went through. See? Even now, that nightmare you lived is helping people. After the call, Julian sat with that thought. Everything he'd endured, the betrayal, the public scandal, the months of doubt, had become the foundation for helping thousands of people. Victoria's cruelty had been transformed into systemic protection for the vulnerable. That was real justice. Not her bankruptcy or her isolation, but the fact that her worst actions had been alchemized into the best outcomes. Meanwhile, Blackwood Industries continued its upward trajectory. 2 years after the wedding disaster, the company hit record profits, $12.3 billion in annual revenue. Julian had expanded into sustainable energy and healthcare technology, sectors that aligned with his evolved values. The business press couldn't stop writing about him. The billionaire who found his conscience. How Julian Blackwood transformed scandal into social impact. The new model of ethical capitalism. But the recognition Julian valued most came from quieter sources. A letter from a grandmother in Ohio who'd escaped an abusive situation after calling the foundation's hotline. A social worker who'd been trained by the Blackwood Center and had successfully prosecuted 3 elder abuse cases in her county. A legislator who'd passed stronger elder protection laws and credited Julian's congressional testimony as the catalyst. These were the victories that mattered. Not stock prices or magazine covers. Real people really helped. Catherine became a sought-after speaker on elder abuse survival. She traveled the country telling her story, advocating for systemic change, inspiring other survivors to find their voice. I'm busier now than I was running the company, she told Julian with a laugh. Who knew getting old and abused would become my career? You're a badass, Mom. I learned from my son. She squeezed his hand. You showed me that survival isn't enough. You have to transform it into something meaningful. Otherwise, the people who hurt you still win. Grace had also flourished. Julian had promoted her to Chief Operating Officer of the Foundation, a role she'd initially resisted. I'm just a maid, she protested. You're a woman who documented months of abuse at personal risk, who stood by our family when it mattered most, and who understands this issue better than most trained professionals, Julian had countered. You're exactly who should be running this foundation. Under Grace's leadership, the Blackwood Center expanded to 12 states. They'd helped over 8,000 families. Trained 1,500 professionals in abuse recognition. Successfully advocated for legislative changes in 9 states. Sometimes I think about that day you called me into your study, Grace said during a foundation meeting. When you told me about your plan to expose Victoria. I was terrified. I thought it would destroy everyone. Did you ever think it would lead to this? Julian gestured around the conference room, a team of dedicated advocates planning their next initiative. Never, Grace admitted. But I'm glad you were brave enough to see past the destruction to what could be built. Julian's personal life had also reached a place he'd never expected to find again, contentment. He and Amanda had been together for over a year now. No drama. No hidden agendas. Just two people who'd both experienced trauma and were committed to building something healthy together. I'm thinking about asking her to marry me, Julian confessed to his mother over dinner one evening. Catherine's face lit up. Finally. I've been waiting for you to come to your senses. It's only been a year. It's been 2 years since Victoria. A year with Amanda. And you're different with her. Settled. At peace. Catherine smiled. When you know, you know. Don't overthink it. The last time I got engaged, it ended with a viral video and a national scandal. The last time you got engaged, you chose poorly. This time, you're choosing someone who sees you, really sees you, and loves what she sees. Catherine leaned forward. Don't let Victoria's ghost keep you from happiness. That gives her power she doesn't deserve. Julian proposed 2 weeks later. Not at a lavish destination with hired photographers. Just a quiet dinner at Amanda's apartment, with a ring he'd spent weeks choosing and words that came from his heart. I'm still broken in places, he told her. Still have trust issues and nightmares sometimes. Still carry scars from what happened. But you make me want to keep healing. Keep growing. Keep becoming better. Amanda's eyes filled with tears. Julian Blackwood, you're not broken. You're rebuilt. And rebuilt things are always stronger than the originals. Obviously, yes. They told Catherine together that same evening. She cried happy tears, the first truly joyful tears Julian had seen her shed in years. This time, we'll have the wedding you deserve, Catherine said. Small. Private. Just people who actually love you. I think I'm done with big weddings, Julian said with a laugh. Smart man. The wedding happened 6 months later. 50 guests in Catherine's garden. Officiated by Judge Morrison, the same judge who dismissed Victoria's lawsuit. Amanda wore a simple cream dress. Julian wore his father's old suit. No cameras. No press. No viral moments. Just vows spoken quietly and sincerely. A celebration of two people who'd both survived their own hells and found each other on the other side. As Julian danced with his new wife under string lights, he thought about the man he'd been 2.5 years ago. Devastated. Angry. Broken by betrayal. That man would barely recognize who Julian had become. Purposeful. Genuinely happy. What are you thinking about? Amanda asked, reading his expression. How grateful I am, Julian admitted. For all of it. Even the painful parts. Because they led me here. To a garden wedding with 50 people? To you. To this life. To understanding what actually matters. Later that evening, after the guests had left and Julian was alone with his thoughts, he found himself reflecting on the entire journey. Victoria's abuse of his mother had been the worst thing that happened to him, but it had also been a catalyst for the best things. Without that nightmare, he never would have started the foundation. Never would have helped thousands of families. Never would have testified before Congress or changed legislation or trained professionals to recognize abuse. Without the public scandal, he never would have gone to therapy. Never would have learned to trust again. Never would have met Amanda or built a relationship based on honesty and healing. Without hitting rock bottom, he never would have discovered what he was capable of when tested. Do you believe in karma? David asked him at the wedding reception. Julian thought about it. Victoria, broke and alone. Catherine, thriving and powerful. Grace, elevated to leadership. Julian himself, married and successful and at peace. I believe in consequences, Julian said finally. Good choices compound into good outcomes. Bad choices compound into bad outcomes. It's not mystical. It's just math. So Victoria's bankruptcy is just math? Her bankruptcy is the natural result of burning every bridge, abusing vulnerable people, and building a life on manipulation instead of substance. Julian shrugged. When the manipulation was exposed, there was nothing real left to hold her up. And your success? Is the result of choosing to build instead of destroy. Every day for 2.5 years, I chose to help people instead of hurt Victoria more than I already had. Those choices added up. David raised his glass. To good math. To good math. 3 years after the wedding that wasn't, Julian sat in his office reviewing the foundation's annual report. The numbers were staggering. Over 15,000 families helped. 3,000 professionals trained. Elder abuse legislation passed in 14 states. A 40% increase in reported abuse cases, not because abuse was increasing, but because people were finally feeling safe enough to report it. The foundation had opened physical locations in 20 cities. They ran support groups, legal clinics, emergency hotlines, and educational programs. They'd partnered with law enforcement agencies and medical facilities to create comprehensive response systems. What had started as one man's rage-fueled attempt to protect his mother had become a national movement. Grace knocked on his office door. The Arizona office just called. They've got a family situation that's complicated. I told them I'd loop you in. What's the situation? Elderly father with dementia. Daughter-in-law who's been financially exploiting him and verbally abusing him. Son is in denial. Grace's expression was grim. Sound familiar? Too familiar. Julian stood. What do they need? Legal intervention. Medical assessment. And probably someone to have a hard conversation with the son about what's really happening. Set it up. I'll fly out next week. After Grace left, Julian stood at his window looking out at the city. 3 years ago, he'd been the son in denial, refusing to see what was happening to his mother until it was almost too late. Now he was the person who helped other sons see the truth before it destroyed their families. The circle was complete. That evening he told Amanda about the Arizona case. "You're going to fly across the country for one family?" she asked. "That's what this has always been about. Not statistics or legislation or good press. It's about individual families. Individual people who need help." Julian pulled her close. "If I can prevent one person from living through what my mother experienced, it's worth it." "You know what I love about you?" Amanda said. "You never forgot why you started this. Some people build foundations as vanity projects. You built one because you actually give a damn. Learned that from my mom. She used to say money is a tool. The question is what you're building with it." "What are you building?" Julian thought about that. The foundation. His marriage. His relationship with Catherine. The life he'd reconstructed from the rubble of his biggest betrayal. "Safety," he said finally. "I'm building safety for people who deserve it. That's all this has ever been about." A month later, Julian received an unexpected letter. Handwritten. Postmarked from Queens. He almost threw it away without reading it. He knew the handwriting. "Victoria." But something made him open it. "Julian, I hope you're well. I heard about your marriage. Congratulations. Genuinely. I'm writing because my therapist suggested I might find closure in telling you this, though I don't know if you care. I'm different now. Really different. Not the person I was performing to be with you, but different from the monster you exposed to. I work at a dental office. I live alone. I don't date. I spend most of my free time volunteering at a senior center, not for show, but because facing the kind of people I used to hurt is the only way I can live with what I did. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking you to think about me at all. I just wanted you to know that the person who hurt your mother is gone. I killed her. It took 2 years of intensive therapy and complete reconstruction of my worldview, but she's dead. What you did, exposing me at the wedding, was the worst and best thing that ever happened to me. Worst because it destroyed everything I'd built. Best because everything I'd built was a lie, and living inside that lie was slowly turning me into something inhuman. Your mother deserved better than what I gave her. You deserved better than what I gave you. I hope you've both found the peace I took from you. I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. But it's all I have. Victoria." Julian read the letter twice. Then he filed it away in his desk drawer. He didn't respond. Didn't need to. Victoria's journey was her own now. But that night he told Amanda about the letter. "Do you believe her?" Amanda asked. "That she's actually changed?" "I don't know," Julian admitted. "And honestly, it doesn't matter. Whether Victoria changed or not doesn't affect my life anymore. I'm not responsible for her redemption or her continued punishment. I'm just done. That's growth. That's exhaustion," Julian said with a laugh. I'm exhausted by Victoria Chin. I've given her 3 years of my emotional energy. That's enough. She can be genuinely reformed or still secretly terrible. Either way, it's not my problem anymore. Amanda kissed him. But, because we have much more important things to focus on. Like what? She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. Like the fact that we're pregnant. Julian's world stopped. Restarted. Stopped again. I'm pregnant. 8 weeks. I was waiting to be sure before I told you. Julian pulled her close, overwhelmed by joy and fear and hope all at once. A child. The child. New life built from the ruins of old pain. We're having a baby, he whispered. We're having a baby. Looking at where everyone ended up, Julian thriving and building a legacy, Victoria broke and alone but possibly changing, Catherine recovered and powerful, Grace elevated to leadership. Do you believe in karma? Or is this just the natural consequence of choices? Because here's what I think. We call it karma, but really it's just math. Actions compound. Good ones build. Bad ones collapse. And eventually, everyone ends up exactly where their choices led them. But I want to hear what you think. Drop your perspective below. 6 months later, Julian stood in a nursery he'd carefully designed with Amanda. Soft colors. Natural light. Books already lining the shelves. Catherine sat in a rocking chair, knitting a blanket for her future grandchild. Your father would have loved this, she said quietly. Seeing you build a family. Build a life that matters. I wish he was here. He is. In every choice you make to be better. To build instead of destroy. To transform pain into purpose. Catherine looked up at her son. That's his legacy. And now it's yours to pass on. Julian thought about the child who would arrive in 3 months. The world they'd grow up in. The values he and Amanda would teach them. He thought about the foundation that would outlive him. The families it would continue helping. The cycles of abuse it would continue breaking. He thought about Victoria, alone in Queens, hopefully changing but definitely paying the price for her cruelty. And he thought about himself, scarred but healing, broken but rebuilt, forever changed by the worst betrayal and the best transformation of his life. Mom, Julian said quietly. If Dad were here, what would he say about all this? Catherine smiled. He'd say exactly what I'm saying. You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and turned it into the best thing you ever did. That's not revenge. That's not even justice. That's alchemy. Julian looked around the nursery. At the life he'd built. The peace he'd found. The purpose that drove him forward. 3 years ago, he'd stood at a wedding altar and destroyed someone's carefully constructed lie. Today, he stood in a nursery preparing to welcome new life built on truth. The journey from one moment to the other had been brutal. But it had been worth every painful step. Because some things, family, integrity, real love, meaningful work, are worth fighting for. Even when the fight costs you everything. Especially then. 3 years after everything fell apart, Julian Blackwood finally understood what his father had been trying to teach him all along. Success isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the lives you touch and the person you become when no one's watching. On the day his daughter was born, Elena Catherine Blackwood, named for Amanda's grandmother and Julian's mother, he held her tiny hand and made a promise. I'm going to teach you something your grandfather taught me, he whispered. Money is just a tool. What matters is what you build with it, who you protect with it, how you use it to make the world less cruel. Amanda, exhausted but radiant in the hospital bed, smiled at him. She's 3 hours old and you're already giving her life lessons? Never too early to start. But he meant it. Every word. Because Julian had learned the hardest lesson of his life. Your character is tested not when things are going well, but when someone you love betrays you. When your world collapses. When you have to choose between destruction and creation. He'd chosen creation. And that choice had defined everything that followed. The foundation continued to grow. By year 4, they'd helped over 25,000 families. Trained 5,000 professionals. Changed legislation in 23 states. But those were just numbers. The real legacy was in the individual stories. The grandmother who escaped financial exploitation. The elderly man who finally got the medical care his family had been denying him. The daughter who found the courage to report her mother's abuser. Each one of those stories was a life reclaimed. A future preserved. A cycle of abuse broken. You know what I'm most proud of? Julian told an interviewer on the Foundation's 5th anniversary. It's not the numbers. It's that we've created a model other organizations are replicating. We've proved that you can systemically protect vulnerable people if you're willing to invest the resources and attention. And it all started because of what happened to your mother? It started because someone showed me that cruelty thrives in silence. And I decided I'd rather be loud than complicit. Catherine sat in the audience during that interview, holding her granddaughter. At 78 years old, she was walking without assistance, speaking at conferences around the world, and living proof that abuse doesn't have to define your ending. You know what's funny? She told Julian later. If Victoria had just been kind to me, she'd probably be married to you right now. Living in wealth. Wanting for nothing. That's not funny, Mom. That's terrifying. It's instructive, Catherine corrected. She had everything she claimed to want within her grasp. But she couldn't resist being cruel to someone powerless. That choice, that fundamental lack of character, cost her everything. Julian thought about that often. How Victoria's downfall wasn't actually about him exposing her. It was about who she chose to be when she thought no one important was watching. Character is what you do in the dark. And Victoria's character, in the dark, was monstrous. But here's what Julian eventually came to understand. Victoria's cruelty was a gift. Not in the moment. Not when his mother was suffering. Not when his world was imploding. But in the aftermath? In the transformation it forced? In the mission it created? In all those ways, it was a gift. I wouldn't go back and change it, Julian admitted to Dr. Chin in one of their final therapy sessions. Even knowing all the pain it caused. Because changing it means erasing the foundation. Erasing the families we've helped. Erasing the person I've become. That's remarkable growth, Dr. Chin said. You've integrated the trauma into your identity without letting it define you. That's the goal of all this work. So I'm healed. You're functional. You're thriving. You've built a life that matters. She smiled. But healing isn't a destination, Julian. It's a practice. You'll keep doing this work for the rest of your life. The difference is now you have the tools. Julian carried those words with him. Healing is a practice, not a destination. He practiced it when old trust issues flared up. When nightmares about the wedding occasionally returned. When he saw Victoria's face on someone else and felt his heart rate spike. He practiced it by choosing, every single day, to build instead of destroy. To protect instead of punish. To create safety for others in the way he'd created it for himself. What would you tell someone going through what you went through? A young man asked at a foundation event. Someone who just discovered their partner was abusing their family? Julian thought carefully before answering. First, believe the victim. Don't make excuses for the abuser. Don't minimize what happened. Trust what you saw with your own eyes. He paused. Second, protect the vulnerable person immediately. Get them somewhere safe. Surround them with support. Make sure they know they're not alone. Another pause. Third, and this is the hard part, decide who you want to be in response to this. You can choose revenge, and I won't judge you for it. God knows I chose it in the moment. But I'd also encourage you to think bigger. How can you transform this pain into protection for others? How can you make sure this kind of abuse has consequences beyond just your situation? The young man nodded, tears in his eyes. Did you ever forgive her? Victoria? Forgiveness is complicated, Julian said honestly. I don't hate her anymore. I don't think about her much at all. I hope she's actually changed, not for my sake, but for whoever she encounters next. Is that forgiveness? I don't know. But it's peace. And peace is enough. As Elena grew from infant to toddler, Julian watched her with a mixture of joy and determination. She would grow up in a world where her grandfather's values were taught explicitly. Where wealth came with responsibility. Where protecting the vulnerable was a baseline expectation, not an exception. She'll never know the man I was before all this. Julian told Amanda one evening, watching Elena sleep. Good, Amanda said. That man was fine, but this man is better. Tested. Refined. Stronger for the breaking. Julian looked at his wife, this woman who'd loved him through his healing, who'd chosen him knowing all his scars, who was raising their daughter to be compassionate and fierce in equal measure. Thank you, he said. For what? For seeing who I could become, not just who I was. Legacy isn't about money in a bank account or buildings with your name on them. Legacy is the lives you touch. The systems you build. The values you pass on. The way you respond when tested. Julian's legacy would be a daughter who understood that wealth was a tool for building, not hoarding. A foundation that would outlive him, protecting vulnerable people long after he was gone. A mother who'd transformed her trauma into advocacy. A marriage built on honesty and mutual healing. And maybe, just maybe, even a former abuser who'd been forced to confront her cruelty and was slowly becoming someone better. 3 years after his world imploded, Julian Blackwood sat in his daughter's nursery, watching her sleep, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Gratitude. Not for what Victoria did, but for who he'd become in response to it. Your grandfather had a saying, Julian whispered to his sleeping daughter. He said the measure of a person isn't what happens to them, but what they do with what happens to them. He adjusted her blanket gently. Someone hurt our family. Someone I trusted. And I had to decide, do I become bitter and vengeful? Or do I transform that pain into something meaningful? Elena stirred slightly, tiny fingers curling around his thumb. I chose meaning, sweetheart. And I'll teach you to do the same. Whatever life throws at you, and it will throw a lot, you build. You protect. You create. You transform pain into purpose. He kissed her forehead. That's the Blackwood legacy now. Not money. Not status. Just the relentless commitment to build something better than what came before. Outside the nursery, Catherine was leaving after a visit. Amanda walked her to the door. He's a good father, Catherine said, looking back toward the nursery. He learned from the best, Amanda replied. Catherine smiled. We both did. We both learned that surviving isn't enough. You have to transform survival into service. Pain into purpose. Betrayal into something beautiful. She hugged Amanda goodbye. Take care of them. My son. My granddaughter. This family we've rebuilt from ashes. Always, Amanda promised. And as Catherine drove away that evening, she thought about the journey they'd all taken. From abuse to exposure to transformation to legacy. It hadn't been easy. It had been brutal, actually. But it had been worth it. Every painful step had led them here. To healing. To purpose. To a legacy that mattered. Those are eternal. Your character is tested in crisis. Your values are revealed under pressure. And your legacy is determined not by what happens to you, but by what you do with what happens to you. Julian Blackwood was betrayed by someone he loved. And he chose to build a movement that protected thousands from similar betrayal. That's not revenge. That's not even justice. That's transformation. That's alchemy. That's turning the worst thing that ever happened to you into the best thing you ever did. And if Julian could do it, broken, betrayed, publicly humiliated, then maybe the rest of us can too. Maybe we can all choose to build instead of destroy. To protect instead of punish. To transform pain into purpose. That's the real legacy. Not what Victoria took from Julian, but what Julian built in response. And that legacy? That lives forever. So that's the story of Julian Blackwood. A billionaire who discovered the woman he loved was torturing his mother. Who chose public exposure over private confrontation. Who weathered a media firestorm and national debate about whether his actions were heroic or cruel. And who ultimately transformed his worst betrayal into his greatest legacy. From that viral wedding video to a foundation that's helped over 25,000 families. From a man broken by deception to a father teaching his daughter that wealth means nothing without character. From revenge to redemption to something even more powerful, purpose. But here's what makes this story matter beyond just Julian's experience. It proves that your response to betrayal defines you more than the betrayal itself. Victoria Chin chose cruelty when she thought no one was watching. That choice cost her everything: her reputation, her wealth, her future, her connections. Not because Julian destroyed her, but because she'd built her entire life on a foundation of manipulation and lies. When that foundation was exposed, there was nothing real left to hold her up. Julian chose transformation. He chose to build systems that protect vulnerable people. He chose therapy over bitterness. He chose to help thousands of families instead of spending years obsessing over one woman's downfall. And that choice? That choice created a legacy that will outlive him. Your circumstances don't define you. Your character does. Julian could have been born into poverty and discovered his partner was abusing his mother. The money wouldn't have mattered. What mattered was the decision to protect the vulnerable, to speak truth even when it was uncomfortable, to transform pain into purpose. You don't need billions of dollars to make that same choice. You just need the courage to act when others stay silent. The integrity to do what's right even when it costs you something. The vision to see how your worst moments can become fuel for your best work. This story is about more than revenge. It's about what we do with our brokenness. Every single one of us will face betrayal at some point. Someone we trust will hurt us or someone we love. And in that moment, we'll have to choose. Do we become consumed by anger and vindictiveness? Or do we transform that pain into something that serves others? Julian chose transformation. Not immediately. He started with rage and public exposure. But over time, he evolved. He built. He healed. He created systems that protect people he'll never meet from suffering he experienced firsthand. That's the real victory. Not Victoria's bankruptcy or isolation, but Julian's ability to take the worst thing that ever happened to him and alchemize it into the best thing he ever built. If you're going through your own betrayal right now, if someone you trusted has hurt you or your family, I want you to know something. You have the same choice Julian had. You can let it destroy you. You can spend years obsessing over revenge. You can become bitter and cynical and closed off to ever trusting again. Or you can do what Julian did. Feel the pain. Process the anger. Get help. And then, when you're ready, ask yourself, how can I make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to someone else? That question will save you. It will give you purpose when you feel purposeless. It will give you direction when everything feels chaotic. It will transform your trauma from something that happened to you into something you use for others. 3 years after the wedding that never was, Julian Blackwood was asked if he had any regrets. He thought for a long moment. Then he said, I regret that it was necessary. I regret that we live in a world where elder abuse is so common that my dramatic response was needed to get people's attention. But do I regret protecting my mother? Do I regret building a foundation that's helped thousands of families? Do I regret becoming a better man through the worst experience of my life? He shook his head. No, I don't regret any of that. Because some things are worth fighting for. And some battles, even when they cost you everything, are worth fighting. That's the lesson. That's what you take from this 3-hour journey through betrayal and transformation. Fight for what matters. Protect the vulnerable. Transform your pain into purpose. And never, ever let someone else's cruelty define who you become. Because at the end of the day, Julian Blackwood didn't win because Victoria lost. He won because he chose to build a legacy that mattered. He won because he turned his darkest moment into light for thousands of others. He won because he refused to stay broken. And if he could do it, so can you. If this story moved you, inspired you, or taught you something valuable about resilience and transformation, please leave a like and share your biggest takeaway in the comments. I read every single one, and your insights make this community special. Maybe you've faced your own betrayal. Maybe you're going through it right now. Maybe you're still deciding whether to choose bitterness or building. Whatever your story is, I want to hear it. Because we learn from each other. We heal together. We become stronger by sharing our journeys. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for investing in Julian's story, Catherine's recovery, and the message that pain can be transformed into purpose. Thanks and see you on the next one. Remain blessed, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because there are more stories like this. More journeys of transformation. More proof that our worst moments don't have to define us. They can refine us. Until next time, remember, You're not defined by what happens to you. You're defined by what you do with what happens to you. Build something beautiful. Protect someone vulnerable. Transform your pain into someone else's protection. That's the legacy. That's the lesson. That's the victory. See you next time.